Greetings and salutations, YouTubers and malefactors. This is Stoplogic Motorsports, and today we're going to be doing an initial review of the RXB250 by Orion Motorsports. So here's kind of a rundown of what the bike is and has to offer. It's a 250cc single overhead cam air-cooled bike, a 6-speed manual transmission, seat height of 36 inches, weight of about 267 pounds. Suspension is a KKE setup for shocks and forks, except for the one that I rode had the Fast Ace front. A nibby 30mm racing carb, 21-inch front wheel, 18-inch rear wheel, setup for enduro riding. And the magic button for e-start. They say the horsepower is around 19.5. It might be give or take a little bit. And just about every bit of billet that can be on this bike is on there. Hubs, triple clamps, whole 9 yards. Folding shifters and large foot pegs standard, which is kind of a nice addition for a bike. And a gripper seat. So, out of the package, there's a lot of extras to it that are pretty nice to have. So who is this bike for, you ask? Well, kind of my estimation, given I'm kind of a Yamaha fanboy. I'm trying to be objective about this. I think this bike would be a really good bike if you're getting back into the sport, or if you're a new rider, or if you're looking for a backup bike in case your main one goes down. It's a much more advanced version of a trail bike than, let's say, like a CRF 230 or a KLX 140 or a TTR 225. It's got superior suspension components even to my WR 250, at least from a usability standpoint, and a lot of extras to it, so it's a pretty comprehensive package for the price. But you say the bike's made from China. Well, yeah, there's a lot of Chinese bikes out these days. It's not like it was 20 years ago where you could get like a no-name Chinese bike and it might survive a lap around the kids' track. These things are being legitimately built and designed to take a good amount of abuse. And truth be told, a lot of the lower-end Hondas are made in Indonesia, and a lot of the parts for your higher-end bikes are made in China now anyway, since everyone's outsourcing and it's a global economy. So you're going to ask me what's the catch of buying kind of like a Chinese bike. Well, there's a few catches that I'll touch on and observations I made while riding. However, the largest catch I think is if a model gets discontinued, parts availability is going to be a little hard to come by. But after this whole COVID deal, unfortunately, my channel being originally based on restoring old bikes, parts were nearly impossible to come by anyway. It took me 6 weeks just to get a front axle for a 96 RM 125. So that argument's kind of been turned on its head in the times of COVID. So the first issue I noticed with the bike is that the front brake had basically no travel to it. I couldn't actually figure out if I was using the front brake or not. So this is kind of one of those fit and finish items that maybe could be touched up on, or it gets better as the bike gets broken in. It was a showroom floor model and only had 5 hours on it, but it was kind of a big deal to me. The second thing that was a bit off-putting about the bike was the clutch engagements. I guess engagement area was like the last third or quarter of the clutch, which on most bikes you'll have your clutch engagement area within like the after you have the first third, you have the other 2/3 of clutch engagement area. So that took me a little bit of getting used to. I guess at the end of the engagement area it'd be easier to feather the clutch if needed, but it's just kind of off-putting if you're used to riding nearly every bike with a clutch engagement area right at that first third. One of the other issues I encountered was once I had ridden the bike really hard and it was up to temperature, I had a lot of trouble getting it down to first. You could attribute this to the bike having less than 5 hours and break-in oil, but it was just one thing I noticed also when it came to shifting. It had kind of a rough shifting to it. But that's just also kind of a fit and finish thing that I've noticed across the board with other Chinese bikes and even the Honda CRF 250L. Just a few of the bikes out nowadays have a bit of a rough shifting. One thing I didn't touch in the raw riding video, which I'll be releasing later this week, is that the bike had a really short wheelbase and very light turning. And just given from experience coming off of the WR250R, which has short wheelbase as well, is that it starts to lack stability at speed. And as I kind of imagine this bike being used like up towards the upper gears, you might have a little bit of like head shake or tank slapping issues. So one thing I might pitch to the RXB crew is see if there's a steering stabilizer that they can fit on this bike, and it might help with the short wheelbase and light handling geometry of the bike. So is the bike of value? It comes to you in a crate at $25.99 and up to about $3,100 with the full Joe Henner workover on everything, suspension, whole 9 yards. You could get a used XR250 for about $1,500, but you're also going to be inheriting problems. And touching back on earlier in the video, parts for older bikes are getting very, very difficult to find. So I would think that this bike does present a good value proposition because it has a lot of extras with it. It currently has a lot of support from the staff at Orion, and unless the model gets discontinued, parts availability is going to be pretty good. Most of the bikes that would overperform with this bike in the used category are 4K up to about 6K. The bike is actually pretty well put together, and any bike that seems to be made before about 2004, just thanks to COVID, just having a ton of problems getting parts for. It's just unfortunate, but it's just one of those signs of the times, and motorcycle manufacturers have kind of focused on just keeping stock of newer parts. What are my final thoughts on the bike? I think for about $3K, it's an amazing value proposition, and with all of the setup and extra parts. Would I make this my main racing bike? I probably wouldn't make it my main racing bike, but if I were in need of a backup bike, this would definitely be one of my top choices. It's just a lot of bike for $3,000 to have set up exactly the way that I need it. Put in perspective that my Yamaha WR250R was $7,600 out the door, and then you have to put on another $500 worth of guards, and I've put another like $300 of fuel tuning and other parts on it, and I'm about to send off the suspension to get it possibly slightly better than this bike for another $1,200 at Go Race. So I'm into a bike for nearly $10K, and at that point you could say, well, why did you buy a KTM? Well, yeah, KTM was a little too much a bike for me, I'll be honest, and my needs were a dual sport bike that was capable with low maintenance intervals. I think this bike has a dual sport version, and the maintenance intervals are not nearly as relaxed as the WR, but it's an easy bike to work on. A single overhead cam air-cooled bike, that's a very, very easy bike to maintenance and maintain. And these Zongshin motors are extraordinarily common. They're on a lot of different bikes, AJPs, GXP250E. I mean, it's one of the most common motors in the world. So let's say you stuff this engine, you could buy a brand new Zongshin engine for about $1,200, whereas I'm looking at $3,500 for a brand new engine for my WR250R. So these bikes kind of have a ability to just be kind of I guess more of a readily available disposable parts, as opposed to a huge investment in time and money to try and keep every aspect of it running. So that's one of the big things I think would be a good reason to keep one of these as a second bike, in my opinion, or a bike for your kid that's transitioning to larger bikes, or a bike for the missus, or a pit bike to have around. But I think this bike could legitimately stand up to a TCCRA race or enduro or hare scramble. I think you could run it with minimal issues. But this is speaking just on the 250 engine. I don't have any experience with the smaller engines, and nor do I really have any interest in having the smaller engine bikes. But imagine this is like your old XR250, but with modern ergonomics and better suspension. So, at 3K fully loaded, yeah, I would pull the trigger. But honestly, I have my heart set on a 2-stroke, so it's not going to wind up being my second bike. But I don't know, it might wind up as like it might wind up in my garage whenever I get my house sold and get reestablished up here in DFW. Well, thanks for hanging in there, and if you like the content, like and subscribe. If you don't, feel free to criticize me harshly. You can whip me, beat me, and make me write hot checks, and we'll see you in the next one.